Next is the hillside garden of Darren Borgias and Gaia. Existing native plant trees and shrubs, a riparian swale next door, and abundant wildlife encouraged owners Borgias and Laser to restore the native understory for a ragged patch of pine oak savanna in which they built their home in 2005. They had first to rid the site of non-native grasses and invasive species like blackberries. The site has been transformed into an eco-restoration garden with native bunch grasses and wildflowers, seeds collected by Darren from plants in the surrounding hills. Welcome.
Good morning, Darren.
Well, hi, I'm Darren Borgias. I live here on Strawberry Lane, and it's a lot we bought in 2004. We really liked the native trees. We had the oak and the pine here, and I've always liked nature, and wildlife, and wildflowers, and I've got a sort of a deep respect for natural systems, and I studied them, in school, and I work in conservation. And I saw this lot as an opportunity to have a very intensive effort on sort of restoring the native understory that you can find in the surrounding Siskiyou foothills. One of my favorite species that you see in drier settings around the valley is this Lupinus albicollis, or white leaf lupin. And this one's growing right around a roamer's fescue. Think about fire-wise, and so we kind of help the deer browse with a little bit of added pruning to make sure that the deer can keep up and browse and keep these plants low and small, just so that there's a little attenuation of the fire hazard. One of the dominants, and it isn't in flower yet, is this woolly sunflower, or Oregon sunshine. And I've got two varieties here. This is Eriophilum venatum. And then there's another, you can see the difference in the leaves here. So say between there, that's Eriophilum lanatum, and this is Eriophilum lanatum achilleoides. This is a little bit more longer lasting, but it's taller. It flowers a little earlier. They're both called Oregon sunshine, and I brought them both into this garden. Here's a good example of the buckwheat, sulfur buckwheat. Really does well, apparently, where it's got some protection of its root space here from the sidewalk, plus the heat coming off from the sidewalk, really helping this plant thrive. June grass, and it's just coming out into flower, Coleria macrantha, and you can usually recognize it by these relatively wider and very soft, hairy leaves. And then you can compare that to the roamer's fescue with these much finer leaves. And then growing in front of the roamer's fescue is a yarrow. The bunch grasses and the yarrow will tend to fill in, and I often will separate them or pull them out, creating more open space for the wildflowers. But I let these native bunch grasses go to seed, collect the seed, and then I mostly cut the culms off with a little hand scythe. But I leave a few for the texture and a reminder of, kind of what it would look like. Any reasonable person would have fenced this. But I like nature. And one of the things that I've discovered as I'm working in my yard, and as the wind starts to move and it's blowing through these pines, the combination of the sound and the native landscape at my feet, I get a true sense of wilderness right in my front yard. And I'm a little concerned about what the feeling would be like if I put a fence around the whole thing. I almost always have a tool with me. And this is one I've really come to love. I've got two of them. It's got some Japanese labeling on it and probably has a name I should learn. And it's normally just a straight edge. But what I've done, I keep it sharp. I've got a grinder in the garage. I've added these little teeth on it, which helps me just snag the roots of the small things that I'm taking out. So I do a little less plowing, you know, with the tool and a little more fine raking. This has been really, really useful tool. I don't see anything right now to, well, yeah, I do. I can always find a weed. Nope, that's a native. I'm going to leave it. And then here's a great example of the lemon's needlegrass, and it's actually in flower, so you can see how the flowers are opening up on this stalk right there. It's wind pollinated. Here's a few more up in here, and it's often these flowers right at the tip of the culm that produce the biggest and fattest seeds. One of the concerns in the natural environment here is how the forests have become overdense, the ingrowth of trees in the absence of frequent fire, returning fire every few years. The Native Americans burned lightning lit fires. They used to keep the forests open. And one of the plants we have here, it became rare because it really likes sun. It's up on the ridges where there was plenty of sun in the past, but it's grown dense. It's a little low-living plant called Orchilea tridentata, or Orchilea. It's in the rose family. So this is a rare plant that just loves this sunny spot. I've just started getting them going here from seed. Here's a flower of it right there. And for the last few years, I've begun to see it just cropping up in this decomposed granite. That plant is thriving like it has not for years because I've been really diligent in using deer spray, a deterrent that makes it taste bad. And so this new growth has not been nibbled off. Really glad to see that. Most of the vegetation here was established with seed that I collected by hand, just in the surrounding foothills, and mostly from, say, Mount Ashland down to the valley floor, and from Grizzly Peak down to the valley floor is the sort of the locus of what I'm considering native with, to this particular location. Some of the best expressions of native bunchgrass and wildflowers where there aren't many weeds, I find this really kind of widespread cerastium or chickweed. This is a native species, and when it's grown in cultivation and they do all of their selection, they would call it snow in summer. I've been able to weed out the non-natives, and the natives have done really well. Something to be said about not disturbing your soil. And something also, there's sort of an advantage that the oaks create with their root uptake and the plant material that they're giving off into the soil, including even some moisture coming up from down low, help create a really lush native bunchgrass understory. These weren't here when we bought the house, but I've collected seed. I've also grown them in my garden and then spread out plants, so you can see the erythronium leaves, and then the shooting stars mixed in, and then a nice little cluster of these delphinium. Here's one where you can see the leaves right in here. Some of the things that I grow down in the garden, I move up into this bed behind this line of rocks, which is filled with the native soil, and then I add a lot of oak leaf mulch. And then I take the baby starts, which are just little rootlets in the fall and no sign of a leaf at all. And then I've spread them out here. And then from here, I can take these plants and then plug them out into the sort of the natural grassy understory. So this is like these might be 3-year-old plants by now. Small flowered wood rush, logula here. Neat to see that there's a delphinium growing in the mix, and the lupin, and a little bit of achillea. One of the things that I've been really pleased with is, seeing the paintbrush get established in the yard. It germinates a little later than the many of the others, and it's often tucked in right next to another plant. I think many people know that it's a symbiotic plant that tends to grow sort of entwined with and connected to the roots of other plants. I see it almost like helping the non-native annual grasses. This one, I've actually seen it form a literal lawn, a carpet. Now it'll have some horkelia growing in it, a few wildflowers. And this is one I've begun growing and anticipate spreading out to fill in more of the space. California oatgrass. And there's a neat story about its seeds. It has an inflorescence, it produces seeds there, but then also down in the culms, and I actually think this is one, down in the culms where the leaves come off the stem, hidden underneath are little flowers that never get opened. They self-fertilize inside there. It's called cleistogamous flowers. And you get as much seed from along the stem as you do from the inflorescence. Here I planted to species that are found on the Siskiyou crest. They're actually Great Basin species, meaning their center of their regional expression is out in the Great Basin, but they're found in the Siskiyou crest and up on the Cascades on the rim. So overhead, we've got some aspen. They're just coming out into leaf now, and you can see how their leaves quake. And then in the understory, right behind me, in flower is curl leaf mountain mahogany. So the typical native around here is birch leaf, but this one has a narrower leaf. It's called curl leaf. So we have a combination of beds that were established specifically for vegetables and cut flowers. But I've commandeered a couple of them, including this one underneath the plastic. I just subdivide the bed, and then when I collect a little tiny sprinkling of seed, I know exactly which seed I'm putting into which one of these little rectangles, and can track, when do they germinate, and make sure I know which species they are. I dug up all the roots of Borgia and Erythronium, but all of this really coarse vegetation in here is all Borgias, Borgia pulchella, Borgia congesta. There's some Tritolea in here. I tried to gather all of those bulbs and get them out into the yard last fall, but I obviously missed a lot of them. And some of the ones that I missed were the Erythronium. So grown from seed and then grown for a few years. I actually dug up and moved around, and they did really well here coming back on their own. So yeah, I get little seedlings started here. I'll go ahead and sometimes commandeer another bed and do some spreading out. And then when they get to a size where I can kind of keep track of them, differentiate them from the weeds. I grew a bunch of delphinium, and I had gathered a little handful of delphinium when I was hiking in the Sierra. It turns out that this Sierran columbine is doing really well here. And I think I might have to expand my sense of the native range of wildflowers that I use in the garden to include this one. Or I may just decide to relegate that to this garden area down here. And then growing in amongst the Sierran columbine is the local native. And it's really interesting. Okay, they're considerably smaller in this particular environment than the Sierran species. Silene hooker eye. It's one of my favorites. It took years for it to show up in my yard. I gathered some seed years ago. It went out in the yard, and I finally saw these little leaves coming up. I'm going, what's that? Is it a weed? Do I pull it or do I let it go? And I let it go, and a year later, it actually went into bloom. So just a real success story that took a while,
Also, on an outing in the Sierra, I saw these beautiful light yellow columbines. I know the species. I identified it. They put the seed in the raised beds and grew them up to small plants. I've got a few more I'll be transplanting out here. I'm pleased to see it's doing okay. And, you know, I would have said Applegate's paintbrush, but this might be Pruinosa. When I'm collecting them in capsules and collecting the seed, I don't always know what species it is, but this doesn't quite have the wavy leaf I would expect to see for Applegates. But this combination of the paintbrush with the sulfur buckwheat, nice little bunch grass, June grass here, the lupin's a little past and going to seed. And then here's Romer's fescue. You see there's, I just sprinkled out seed here of a variety of things, most of which I've collected from my yard, from other plantings that have gone to seed, and then I'm spreading them out and increasing certain species. One thing I do when I see a paintbrush coming up, just so that I don't step on it or I avoid weeding it, I'll often just put a little ring of white rocks, if I can find them, you know, around them. And so I see another ring of white rock over there, and there's more hiding in here. So there's two species here, generally referred to as ukau or snakeheads. They grow from a bulb, and you can see the Congesta version up here with just a load of flowers in the head. And then down below, slightly longer tube on the flower and less congested. You can see a slightly different color. This is Pulchella. Pedicel parsley in here in the mix. This is a lomatium that ends up having this inflated petiole right here at the base, really identifiable. And this is a here's its broad leaves down here, kind of pretty for a lomatium. What we are able to do with a little deer protection is prevent the deer from eating them down right to the ground. It's as if this is their favorite forage. And I can see this is Applegate's paintbrush with a slightly wavy leaf. And then it's in here with a mix of the lupin and the Oregon sunshine, the yellow flower. And this is a really common assemblage of wildflowers. One of the other plants that I've only recently started getting going is this arrowleaf buckwheat. And like the paintbrush, the deer really want to eat it. Now it's not quite in bloom yet. The buds are just about to break. I'm just, and I see as I go over this way, there's another one that's just about to break. It's a plant I got started a couple of years ago, and the deer just annihilated them. I took them right down to root. There's some other things that have already flowered, and I've just found two individual weeds, a little bit of the rat-tail fescue and Era caryophylla. And I do that level of detailed weeding and actually enjoy it. And in moments like this, when I'm going through this native bunch grass and I recognize this as a natural community, and all I can hear is the sound of wind in the pines, I get a feeling of, or the same feeling I get when I'm out in wilderness and just kind of poking around, looking at rocks and soil and vegetation patterns and wildflowers. Yeah, kitten's ears, Calicortus, told me we might have had some in bud. Many of mine have already begun to go to seed. And I'll be out here. I've already started collecting seed this year of one of the species, lomatium. And like here's right next here is a shooting star. These will produce stiff brown capsules, and I'll be collecting those so I can spread those out. Oh, and here's a rare plant right here that rarer in the siskiyous. This little flower is Horkelia. That's the Horkelia, and then the leaf is what expresses the tridentata has 3 teeth right on the tip of the leaf. That's rare in the Ashland watershed because it's gotten too shady up there. Just way too many trees, especially on the ridges that used to be much more open, much more open. I like having just hoses around where I can very selectively water, as opposed to having everything get sprayed and it all get the same. This is Lomatium utriculatum, or foothill lomatium. I have a tag around here somewhere. And if you look beneath it, you can see some of the seeds are already on the ground. So I'll kind of really gauge, just how dry are the seeds, how white and pale have they become. And I may just come along and help out the process a little bit. And they'll go into just a little tiny paper sack or a paper folded envelope and dry out further and then be ready to disperse. This is Eriophyllum lanatum, and it has the standard lanate leaves. But the more common species we see in the foothills around here, as I recall, I collected this near, out in the Applegate, but I see it up in the Ashland watershed as well.